So I think that's all I have, and I'd be happy to take questions. Oh yeah, here's a series of references for those that want to look up any of these studies that I mentioned or any of these symptoms that I talked about. They're in the 4 references on this slide. Now we can go to questions.
Okay, super. Thank you so much, both Dr. Boston and Dr. Clapp. This was very interesting content, and I think it's very relevant. There was a question that did come in. Do you know of any other studies that are being done on Desert Storm veterans exposed to burning oil fields and bladder cancer, not just to the burn pits, but do you know if there's anything that's been done in that area?
Yeah, the Gulf War which was the first Gulf War was in 1991, and there's been a tremendous amount, and there was oil wells that were set on fire at the end of that, and people were exposed. And there have been some studies done. I'm sure that the literature on that is voluminous at this stage. There were national committees set up to consolidate what was known and what could be understood from the various studies of Gulf War veterans. That commission was disbanded recently, I think in the last 3 or 4 years, but their reports are available. I don't have that handy, but if you go to the VA and look at the Gulf War illness websites or link to those parts of the VA that talk about Gulf War illness, you'll see a lot of the evidence that's been compiled that's available there.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Another question. Has any interaction between solvent Agent Orange exposure and smoking and bladder cancer risk been observed? For instance, I guess, are you more at risk from exposure to solvents and Agent Orange if you were also a smoker? Do you know that, either of you?
I don't know that. That's been able to be teased out. But I do know that when a lot of these retrospective papers that sort of go back in the past and look at veterans that are exposed to Agent Orange, and they're trying to figure out if that Agent Orange exposure is the reason why they got bladder cancer, a lot of those veterans were smokers at the time, which is, as we all know, a big risk factor for bladder cancer. So if anything, they tend to overlap and make the picture a little bit more complicated. But I don't know specifically the answer to that question. I don't know if Dick has any thoughts.
No, I haven't looked into that.
Okay, I'm hoping that you all are seeing my screen right now. I went back to the link that I provided earlier in our discussion that's specifically showing some of the different research studies that are done on military exposure. So again, if you want to follow that link and dig around, I think you might have a little additional information that could be provided on there as well. Any studies done or contemplated to compare Vietnam veterans with non-Vietnam service vets, maybe mirror the Camp Pendleton versus Camp Lejeune, since that study was so foundational to the presumptive decisions? Has there been any work that you might know about that compares current veterans with veterans that might have been exposed to Agent Orange in Vietnam?
Yeah, I can speak to that. I actually did my doctoral dissertation on exactly that, comparing cancer in Vietnam veterans to cancer in other veterans that didn't go to Vietnam but were in the service at the same time. And the dissertation was finished in 1987, and so it only includes that comparison up until that time period. But we did find an excess, in particular, of soft tissue sarcoma in the Vietnam veterans compared to the other veterans that were in the military but didn't go to Vietnam. And that, I testified about that at in the U.S. Congress, actually, I guess it was called the Committee on Veterans Affairs, and then the Agent Orange Act, which was passed in 1991, included soft tissue sarcoma as one of the initial compensated cancers or diseases. There were two cancers and something called chloracne that were in the original legislation. And that was that type of comparison. I'm not aware of it being done more recently, up until the present. Might be worth doing, but at least up until the late 80s, that was at least one example of what the question asks about.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, thank you. Well, I really appreciate that you kind of did the parallel to show how the exposures that we've seen in 9/11 are so similar to the exposures that our military veterans have been, subjected to in their occupations. There's another question. Since bladder cancer can take 40 years to show up, isn't it time to look again at Vietnam vets versus non-Vietnam vets? I guess, maybe doing a follow-up to your dissertation, would this be sort of an interesting paper? Although you have to look at, I guess, all of the exposures that veterans in modern warfare are now exposed to, and how does that compare? It would be very interesting to take a look at that, I suppose. This was suggested by one of our participants.
I think it's a good idea. I think I said it needs to be updated. I'm now retired, so I'm not going to do it, but I hope that there is some younger researcher somewhere that would do that. It's possible to get the information and even collect information about, as you said, Stephanie, other exposures that have occurred in the meantime, or to people who've been, have been redeployed in other combat situations. But all of that can be gleaned from military records and from interviews.
Right. So Dr. Mossinen, so perhaps that could be a great study for one of your fellows to take on, something along those lines.
It's a very good idea. We'll look into it.
Okay. So let's see. I'm just looking to see if there's a couple more questions. There was somebody that's working on a group that is helping to detect bladder cancer in urine, and they have sequencing tests that provide information and how it can correlate with bladder cancer, and wanted to know about any studies that are being done with veterans or with Beacon. And I know Dr. Mossinen, you're kind of tuned into what's going on. Can you think of any studies that are right now looking to check for bladder cancer in the VA population? Is there anything that you know of, any clinical trials that are trying to fine tune that?
None that I know of. The last time I really looked into this was maybe a year or two ago, and I also looked at the Institute of Medicine or National Academy of Sciences report, but I don't think there's anything currently going on, at least that I know about, specifically in that population.
Okay. Okay, great. Well, I'll refer people to our clinical trials dashboard, where we have a listing of all of the clinical trials. If anybody were interested in engaging, it's at bcan.org, and you click the tab that says clinical trials, and you can search for many different clinical trials. I don't think we have any additional questions. So again, I would very much like to thank CFEN for partnering with us to develop this webinar program, and Seattle Genetics, Bristol Myers Squibb, EMD, Serono, Pfizer, Janssen, Genentech, Merck, and Photocure for their support. Remember that you will be receiving a quick email survey after this program, and your thoughts and comments are very, very important to us. We greatly appreciate you filling this out. You will also get a link to the unedited video tomorrow. So everything will be available so you could refresh and look at it again should you want to. And if not, we will definitely let you know when the edited video and the transcript are available on our website. So thank you all so much for joining us, Dr. Mossinen and Dr. Clapp and CFEN. Thank you so much for making this such a wonderful program. We greatly appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having us.
You're very welcome for all that it took.
Okay, thanks. Bye-bye.